Okay, let's continue to look at the autonomic nervous system. So in the previous video, we talked about the fact that the motor or efferent part has two principal types of neurons. So you've got the sympathetic division, which sympathetic neurons are more activated during times of stress on the body. So the sympathetic division of your autonomic nervous system you could think of as helping you through stressful situations. These could be physical stresses on the body, and a classic physical stress on the body is exercise. So when we exercise, it stresses our body. So we have to do things to help us with that stress. It just happens to be a good stress on the body. Some emotional stresses are going to be activated by sympathetic, or emotional stresses will activate the sympathetic division. We also think of the E situations as being sympathetic. Exercise, emergencies, excitement, and embarrassment. So that's another way to think of sympathetic responses. And then another one is fight or flight. So when the body needs to fight something or run away, we activate our sympathetic nervous system. So in order to fight or flight, we usually need to increase our heart rate. We need to increase our respiratory rate. We need to increase blood flow to skeletal muscles so we can either get out of the stress or fight the stress. So these are all kind of what you should think of when you hear the word sympathetic in this context. Why do we have these responses? Well, one is to promote mental alertness. Again, helps us deal with stress. Promotes vision. So we're going to look at the fact that our pupils dilate using sympathetic neurons so you can take in more of your environment. And promotes skeletal muscle activity. So we're going to increase blood flow to skeletal muscles, and a really important response is to free up energy for skeletal muscle activity. So we're going to free up glucose, increase blood sugar levels. We're going to break down fat to release energy. So in order to deal with stress, you need energy. On the other hand, we have parasympathetic, which is activated during rest or reading or restoration and repair. So you kind of have the 4 E's for the sympathetic division and the 4 R's for the parasympathetic. We also call this rest and digest. So our digestive system is activated by parasympathetic neurons. Now normally we're in kind of a parasympathetic mode, and then again during occasional times of stress we will activate sympathetic. Organs. So we have visceral organs, internal organs. Most of our internal organs are what we call dual innervated. Dual innervation means they have both sympathetic neurons and parasympathetic neurons that control the organ. And usually those neurons are going to do opposite things. Classic example is the heart, right? We have a heart. Sympathetic neurons go to it, and that increases your heart rate. Well, we also have parasympathetic neurons that go to it, which guess what? Will help slow your heart. So sympathetic and parasympathetic go to most organs, and they usually do opposite things to that organ. This is kind of a scary slide. These two pictures here are found in every single textbook. Every single A&P book has some sort of drawing like this, and it always is very intimidating. So we're going to try to simplify these. What we're looking at on the left is kind of the sympathetic system. On the right we have the parasympathetic system. So a couple things I want to point out. We're going to simplify this. One is all the effectors. You'll notice there's liver on each side, which means it's dual innervated, meaning it has sympathetic and parasympathetic. You've got structures in your lungs that are innervated by both sympathetic and parasympathetic. Your heart, like we just mentioned, innervated by both sympathetic and parasympathetic. So most organs in the body have both sympathetic and parasympathetic neurons that can regulate it. Maybe speed it up, slow it down, turn it on, turn it off. You'll notice over here on the sympathetic side there are some organs that are only innervated by sympathetic neurons. Classic examples: sweat glands, hair follicles, or I should say the smooth muscle that erects the hair, erector pili muscles, and blood vessels, only innervated by sympathetic neurons. So that's a big thing to look at. Next, look at where the neurons come out of the CNS. On the sympathetic side, they come out of what we call the thoracic and lumbar regions, whereas the parasympathetic neurons either come out of the brain using 4 cranial nerves, or they come out of the sacral region. So that's kind of a big difference between sympathetic and parasympathetic. You'll notice there are ganglia. We're not going to get into the details behind all these ganglions, but remember that's just where pre and post ganglionic neurons will synapse. Okay, so taking a little closer look, I'm going to go really quick through this. This is just the sympathetic, so this was that left side on the previous slide. This just summarizes some of the things specific to the sympathetic division. It's commonly called the thoracolumbar because of where the neurons come out of the CNS. It uses this big ganglion called the sympathetic trunk or sympathetic chain. That's this thing. It's on each side of the spinal cord. It's used by the sympathetic nervous system. And then there's some other ganglia used by the sympathetic. Parasympathetic, again, neurons come out of the cranial region and sacral region, so we often refer to it as the craniosacral division. And then there are some ganglions as well. So that's just some differences between sympathetic and parasympathetic. In the next video, we're going to be talking about what neurotransmitters are used by your autonomic nervous system.